Serious medics of Reddit, what is the weirdest that's not a real thing reason a patient has come to see you? Former army medic here. There is a lot of this that we attribute to malingering. And to be honest, I usually had no problem telling a guy to take off if he came in complaining about something that was obviously not real. Because in the army, if you want to call in sick for a day, it's this long drawn out process that can take several hours. And since soldiers typically work 10 to 12 hours a day or longer and the job is oftentimes very tedious and stressful, I was always fine with giving a Joe the day off if he came to the battalion aid station because he had bilateral knee pain with absolutely no visual symptoms whatsoever or complained of stomach pains, but then goes to the chow hall and eats a huge breakfast. But sometimes, especially when I worked as a medic at a base that did boot camp, I would run into some really crazy shit. One kid said he had fluid leaking from his testicles, like just coming off his balls like sweat. Another guy said that the aliens that had been harassing him and his mother since he was a child finally found him at boot camp. That one was actually sort of sad and ended up with going outside of my pay grade. From what I understand, this kid's mom was a paranoid schizophrenic who had delusions of aliens haunting her. She raised her son from birth to believe in her delusions. Since the kid was homeschooled, I don't know what the actual term is, but he wholeheartedly believed what his mom taught him. So he had the same delusions as her. Probably worse actually, but they didn't come from a chemical imbalance or anything. I have no idea how or why he enlisted in the army, but when you're in the military you wonder that about at least 25% of the people you run into. My throat's dry. Well, what do you normally do when your throat is dry? I drink water. Did you try that? No. My dad's a doctor, and when you are the child of a doctor there are many moments like that in your life. Mostly where you're on the receiving end of the phrase. But when my dad was still doing his home clinic, he had several patients with the weirdest symptoms. Once a man came in and said he had a burning penis and actually thought someone was coming in and lighting a fire under it while he slept. He wanted a cure for burning, when in reality he had gonorrhea. He got offended when my dad told him this because he was married and his wife was fine, but 80% of women that have gonorrhea are asymptomatic. Turns out the dude had a serious cheap prostitute addiction, which is where he and his wife got it from. Had a guy come into the ED complaining of right lower quadrant, RLQ, abdominal pain, but stated it was because he was pregnant. He was absolutely sure of it. His wife was in the room with him and fully vouched for the story, which is probably the craziest part to me. Said that he had seen this other doctor at this other hospital who had confirmed it on ultrasound and shown him the fetal heartbeat. The doctor the patient cited was a real doctor, but did not work at the hospital he said he'd been to. This was a small ED, so our ultrasound tech had to be called in. Obviously, no ducking way that would happen for this. We wanted to work him up for appendicitis, because obviously that could be a real thing. And if he's actually having this pain, something could be wrong. Recommended a court. Patient said he didn't want a court. He just needed an ultrasound to check if his baby was okay. We told him multiple times, sir, it is impossible for you to be pregnant. You don't have a uterus. He didn't budge. We ordered the court anyway, because we still want to see what's causing the pain. And sometimes you just have to put the orders in and hope for the best. This guy ended up leaving his room, followed a nurse taking a patient to radiology, and gate crashed radiology, telling them that he badly needed this ultrasound. Security escorted him back. Needless to say, as is often the case, he eloped when we wouldn't cave to his ludicrous demands. I had a patient come in for a general surgeon's consult and was convinced that she had a blood cancer, which is non-surgical BTW. I asked her, okay, have you had, insert all probing questions here. She says no. Okay. So I asked how she was so confident in having the blood cancer, and she says that she read about this test you can do on the internet, where you get about this much while approximating like half a cup rum and drink it. And if it makes your lymph node hurt, then you have the cancer. And then she points to two spots where there definitely aren't major lymph nodes and says that's where she felt it. I said okay, well keep that in mind and check your labs in case. So I finished my interview and walked out. I checked her labs from a month ago and they were perfect. No one told me how solid your poker face would need to be when I started medical school. Thank goodness for masks. Story from my dad, who is a paramedic. In the medical world, there are those kinds of people who think they have every problem / condition / sensitivity under the sun. When meeting one of these people, my dad decided to test how far this guy can go faking symptoms. He started asking the man pretty normal problems like diabetes, heart complications, IBS. Then in a feat of genius, my genius dad asks if he's had any problems with his Fajigli gland. To anyone not familiar with that term, that is a made-up body part found in the fairies in beloved children's show Fairly Odd Parents. My dad got this guy to admit he had issues with the made-up body parts for cartoon fairies. The best part is that as a paramedic, he has to write what is called a run report for every call they respond to, basically explaining what happened to the patient, what was done, shit like that. My dad had to look up on Nickelodeon's website how to properly spell Fajigli gland to put on an actual run report. Edit. Typos. Unrelated to the topic. But I do the same thing with vendors at electronics stores. When I'm looking for advice on what to buy, I ask the salesperson questions I already know the answer to. If they answer correctly, I follow their advice. If they lie, I thank them for their help and do my own research. You would be surprised how many just outright lie to you. Once I was looking to buy solar panels and asked the salesman what the efficiency percentage was. Most panels go from around 15% to 22% depending on the quality. Guy told me their model had an efficiency percentage of 80%, which would break the world record by about 40%. I'm a veterinary student, and we had a lady bring her dog to internal medicine because she was convinced he had echinococosis. Google if you like weird, gross parasites. Apparently she had contacted it once upon a time, unknown if true, and she was convinced her dog had it despite the fact that the dog had never been in an area with endemic echinococcus, and she had it several years before getting the dog. She was dead set on the most extensive diagnostic workup possible. Usually it's harder to convince people to pay the couple $1,000 for a court, and here's this lady demanding basically an elective one. The dog was not sick, and court did not find any hydatid cysts. Still have no idea why she chose that moment in her and her dog's lives to suddenly believe to her core that he had it. Got another story secondhand to share from a vet I used to work with. It's like the trifecta of the quintessential stupid shit vets deal with. Exhibit A. Some neighbor she barely knew contacted her through a neighborhood Facebook page. Exhibit B. The lady reports that her dog was raped by a raccoon and now has a half raccoon baby stuck inside her that won't come out. Exhibit C. The lady insists that her dog needs help, but she doesn't have any money. So as a vet, my friend is morally obligated to abort the half raccoon baby for free. Gynecologist here. A woman came to the ER because she claimed her uterus had wandered off inside her body. She was sobbing hysterically and seemed genuinely afraid. I called my backup senior consultant, who immediately said that he'd met the patient before and that he would handle it. He walks in, examines her, wriggles his hand in her vagina, and then tells her the uterus is now firmly back in place. The woman now cries of happiness and thanks him profusely before happily being on her way. Saw a patient once who stated she caught diabetes from her best friend after sharing clothing. Yes, diabetes is a real thing, but catching it from your friend's sweater is not a real thing. My friend is a vet, and one day this very worried lady comes with a puppy in a box and an egg. She whispers to my friend that she has a female duck, and that her puppy had been messing around with this duck. So she was worried that the egg the duck had laid that morning was some kind of abomination like the basilisk or some other folklore monster. Friend had to bite down laughter and explain that eggs are not laid as a result of sexual intercourse, and that her duck's egg wasn't fertilized. The lady gave the puppy away eventually, unconvinced that there was no possibility of creating a dog-duck freak. Not exactly sure if this fits, but it does fall in line with people not understanding medicine. I'm not a doctor, but my sister is, and we are both very unfortunate to have swamp people as family. They are not very bright. Well, about 4 years ago my father was fighting cancer and losing the battle. One of my aunts flew into the metropolitan I live in And later that evening around the dinner table she asked where my father's girlfriend was. I informed her that she had died of cancer a year previous. Her reaction was some over the top anger, yelling and cussing about how terrible it is that his girlfriend gave him her cancer. I actually had to get my sister to drive 40 minutes to my house and explain to her that cancer is not transmitted from person to person. And it was in fact my father's 42 years of chain smoking that gave him cancer. It took quite some convincing. I work in rural EMS. Shift changes at 8 am. This call came in at 7 am. Mind you, a call for us can last as long as 5 hours depending on which hospital we are heading to. The call comes in as uncontrolled vomiting. My partner and I immediately head to the address. It took us a while to find the house because we had a house description. But the house was behind a tree line that was behind a locked gate. Anyways, we grab our pack and monitor, climb the gate, only to be met by our patient who was driving herself to the gate. She climbs out of her truck, limbos under the gate and crawls into the back of the ambulance. I asked her when was the last time you threw up. Last night before bed, she said. She claimed to have eaten bad Mexican food and believed that was the cause. She was totally stable the entire time. It ended up being about a 3-hour call. I was so pissed. I'm a nurse and did telephone triage for a while. Once had a guy call in who was gravely concerned that he had sepsis. I asked what his symptoms were. He said he had none. I asked why he thought he had sepsis. He said he heard on NPR that picking your nose can cause sepsis and wanted to be tested. For those who don't know, sepsis is an infection that spread to your blood and generally affects several organ systems. It's deadly. If you have sepsis you will feel like you're dying. He felt fine. So I tried to explain this. We went back and forth for several minutes. He insisted that he had dormant sepsis without symptoms. This is 100% not possible. I ended up suggesting he make an appointment with his doctor, just because the conversation was going nowhere. Patient called 911 for an allergic reaction. This triggers a lights and sirens response from the ambulance. We walk in, and it's a little old lady dressed in her winter coat just finishing putting on her lipstick. Not really what you expect to see. She explains to me and my partner that she had terrible nightmares and that's clearly a sign that she's allergic to Lasix. It's not, but she called 911. So we go through the motions and put her on the monitor, a fib, and she's got no HX and is on no meds. We took her in, not lights and sirens, and gave report. Found out later that she told all the docs that she was in for allergy to Lasix resulting in nightmares. Children's Hospital Tech. It was more of a I wish this wasn't real. But we had a 2-year-old come to my unit after ingesting fentanyl and arresting. Apparently mom's boyfriend at the time left some around, and being a typical kid, she stuck it in her mouth. The kid's body was devastated. She was a typically functioning kid before, but she had severe brain damage after the incident and now needs multiple machines to keep her alive. I had a lady come in convinced she had hypothermia because she kept checking her temperature orally immediately on waking, and it was always 92 degrees. She thought it was getting low while she slept and causing her snoring, daytime sleepiness, etc. I explained that since she is snoring and sleeping with her mouth open, an oral temperature immediately on waking wouldn't be accurate and a temperature of 92 degrees wouldn't be compatible with life. She wanted continuous temperature monitoring while sleeping. Yeah, that isn't a thing. Even in a sleep study, I discussed with her that she probably has sleep apnea and that she doesn't need to check her temperature unless she is having chills, sweats, other symptoms of infection. She got mad and left. SMH. Incompatible with life was how I was told to describe patients in an MCI as an EMT. EMTs aren't allowed to call their dead. So if we saw a guy with no head or half their blood on the floor and fixed pupils, they weren't dead on arrival, they had injuries incompatible with life. No reports contained dead upon arrival, just vitals and injury incompatible with life. A certain doctor was visited by a mother and a 16-year-old child requesting for medical leave because the child felt something went into his right eye and he rubbed it so much that he could not open his eyes. So he went back to sleep. Mother thinks he had an eye infection or something. Upon further questioning, apparently at 8 AM that day, the child had a final year examinations that day, his eyes were normal. Medical leave was not granted. Molecular genetics, we see people who come in because they took a whole exome test from one of the commercial providers, which supposedly identified a serious novel mutation in an obscure gene which they think might be associated with whatever medical problem they have. We do a targeted sequence of that variant's location and 99% of the time find nothing. False positive caused by the commercial lab's low depth testing, combined with a highly automatic reporting system, and how they don't manually review or confirm variants via targeted sequencing. The lesson here is, don't make clinical decisions based only on the findings of uncertified exome tests. The reverse situation is annoying. The moment I say heterozygous MTHFR mutation, doctors roll their eyes at me and start lecturing me on the unreliability of online testing. I then ask them to look up my pathology reports and explain, usually just as condescendingly, that my test results were performed by a hematologist as part of a very extensive investigation based on genuine, measurable, observable clinical symptoms. Sometimes we see really weird stuff too, like a prenatal screening for a fetus which is compound heterozygous for an extremely rare dominant disorder that affects like only 50 people in the United States. And think, wow, statistically this shouldn't be a thing that's happening. Then when we read the patient history and see that the parents obviously were both affected and met at a support group, then hooked up and got pregnant with a fetus that happened to inherit both parental mutations. I once got a 3 AM 911 call to a sick person. Wonderful dispatching. I get there and this dude has a pimple on his back. Not a boil, a pimple. He was insistent that we take him to the hospital. Turns out that he wanted to go because the voices told him that he would get blood poisoning and die if he didn't go. My wife made me go to the ER for a pimple once. To be fair to her, when I popped it, several tablespoons worth of pus and blood came out and I was left with an inch-ish deep hole in my upper side and there was a pretty sizable red area around it. They scrubbed out the hole, gave me a shot of antibiotics, a script for more, and sent me home. Still, I went to the ER for a pimple. Have some medical training and am notorious for providing potential diagnoses to friends who have new symptoms plus pre-existing conditions and want to have suggestions for the doctor so the docs don't write it off as the pre-existing conditions. I had a friend tell me, say I'm addicted to the smell of my own skin, ask me if it was a symptom of their mental health disorder or a new disorder they should go get checked out for. I repeatedly told them it's not a thing. They kept whining. I went to their house, smelled their soap. It smelled fantastic. I secretly replaced the soap in the bottles with one the same color. Friend shut up about the skin smelling addiction. The friend literally just liked the smell of soap. Army medic working in an aid station. Guy comes in with a nosebleed. Says it keeps happening and doesn't stop. Of course we tell him to just chill and hold some tissue to it while write up his paperwork. Then this dude's sergeant comes in. Hes pissed. Why aren't we helping his dying soldier? Why aren't we freaking out like him? He repeated tells us, medics, that he knows nosebleeds mean brain tumors or cancer. No shit, that's what he said. Angrily. Also, nosebleeder wouldn't stop snorting the gross blood clot and spitting it out, so it wouldn't stop bleeding. Neither one of them listened to a word we told them, but eventually we just said duck it. He ain't gon' die. So we sent them away while his sergeant grumbled about our laziness. It's like he wanted us to pop smoke and have a Black Hawk take him away. My most recent woman is convinced that the tickle in her throat is throat cancer. She has no other symptoms of cancer that at the stage of causing a tickle would be evident, i.e. swallowing difficulty, voice changes, weight loss. Anyway, she calls us in hysterics that she needed to be scoped immediately because she was going to die. I talked her down, I thought, but told her what to watch for, difficulty swallowing, etc. and if she experienced them, to go to Emerge so she could get imaging sooner than her court scan. Booked 7 MOs away. She went to her that night, got the court, found nothing. She was enraged and started sling negligence around. Got scoped 2 days later. Turns out she has a clump of gastric cells in her throat that produce acid causing the tickle. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.